All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Lunch and Learn, Building Domestic Violence Awareness all year long. If you hear the dings from my computer, I hope it's not too distracting, but we're letting in folks, and I'm so happy that everyone is able to join us. Very quickly, it's 12:01, so we're gonna get started. We have our speakers, Ms. Marta Pelaez and Ms. Maricarmen Garza, ready to present and share their expertise with all of you. Very quick, by way of introduction, we have Ms. Marta Pelaez will be presenting first. As many of you know, she is the CEO and President of the Family Violence Prevention Service here in San Antonio, serving Bexar County and surrounding areas. She has been with the organization since 1999. So just by way of time, that's how much expertise and what a great treasure we have with Marta. She is also a board member of the Texas Council on Family Violence that helps set policy for the state as a whole and lobby our legislature to make sure that the laws and the statutes that we have are best to serve our families. And she is also in her typical forefront advocacy, started the first pet shelter at the Family Violence Prevention Service. So that is a great value to our community. So without further ado, Ms. Pelaez, Marta, please take it away. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely, thank you, and welcome everybody. At this point, my thoughts go to every child who may have lost a mother or a grandmother due to COVID. So please share in my wanting to bring those thoughts to the front as I open this conversation with you all. And I say conversation because I truly want this to be as interactive as possible, welcoming your questions and your input. Domestic violence, unfortunately, impacts just about everybody in a community. When you think that 1 in 3 women will at any point in time be a victim of domestic violence, then that means that either we know someone or have been domestic violence victim ourselves. So I'd like to give you a very brief historical perspective of what domestic violence has been through the years. And even though I will begin at 454 BC, don't be afraid, I will not cover every year. But 454 is important because it was the year when the Romans gave us patria potestas, or patriarchy, which reaffirmed the entitlement of men over women and children. In fact, women and children did not have any voice. They did not have an identity of their own. They were the property of the husband, who had the responsibility of resorting to beatings necessary to control their behavior, and at the same time, of course, assert his patriarchal entitlement. During the Middle Ages, theological writings supported the inferiority of women and added the view that women were susceptible to demonic influence and in need of beatings to diminish the devil's spell. The last 2 centuries have seen legislative and social attempts at protection and empowerment of women, including the right to an education. In fact, and this is a large historic bump in the years chronologically, in 1869, Harvard University opened its doors to women. That is 50 years later, after they had been open for men only. In Alabama in 1871, that was the first state that repealed the legal right of a husband to beat his wife. That is, of course, if she reported it, if she was believed, and if legislative protections had not been circumvented by what became the Stitch Law. That was an unofficial way to condone physical abuse as long as the injuries did not merit stitches. That is why it was called the Stitch Law. In 1920, you will all remember your history, women were allowed to vote for men. In 1960, state and national legislation was passed, and it passed a law criminalizing abuse of children and women. But many were in fact against it, saying that government interference in the family in any way was in fact anti-family. So it wasn't embraced at the time it was passed. By 1974, another circumvention emerged that was the Curtin Law, where a North Carolina Supreme Court judge declared that, and I'm quoting, if no permanent injury has been inflicted, nor malice, cruelty, nor dangerous violence shown by the husband, it is better to draw the curtain, shut out the public gaze, and leave the parties to forget and forgive. That same year, the Credit Equality Act allowed women to apply for credit cards. That only meant that women could participate equally with the men in the debt of the household. How exciting was that? We could have debt. In 1977, the first shelter for abused women in Texas opened its doors, the Safe Place. 9 months after that, the battered women in San Antonio opened a very small house to bring in women who were having some kinds of difficulties because the term domestic violence wasn't even coined. This was 1977. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act was signed into law in 1978. Until then, a woman could be fired from her workplace for being pregnant. And you and I know that in very discreet ways, some aspects of that practice still continue today. In 1980, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission officially defined sexual harassment, defining it as something that has taken the meaning of rape not being treated equally when it happens in the marriage, as it is taken to mean in some other circumstances. Also in this was in 1990, then Senator Joseph Biden introduced the Violence Against Women bill in the Congress of the United States. It did not become an act until 1994, when it was signed into law by President Bill Clinton. In the early 1990s, stalking was identified as a crime in spite of the fact that 90% of all domestic homicides demonstrated being stalked and beaten in the year prior to their deaths. In 1990, this was in 2009, strangulation became a felony when it was treated as a misdemeanor in cases of domestic violence until then. Almost a decade later, in 2018, 28 women were fatally shot in San Antonio. It was the highest number per capita in Texas. All of them, except for one, were shot to death. And we continue to live in a nation without any policies regulating the ownership of guns. At our shelter, we have registered for 6 consecutive years the highest daily census in the state of Texas. We operate the shelter without the concept of capacity dictating whether a victim is brought in or not. Other shelters in the state of Texas do have a capacity policy. I go with the fire code capacity. It's 230 beds that I can have at the shelter. If a victim is appropriate for the shelter, she will be allowed to come in. If I do not do that, I will be facing the face of that victim looking at me straight in the eyes tomorrow in the Express News, the local newspaper, because she was killed or further abused if she is sent back to where she came from. So for that very reason, I will not ever have a capacity policy related to space. So who is this woman that comes to the shelter? She is a 36-year-old mother of 3 children. She has a 6-month-old in her arms, and in tow are an 11-year-old and a 5-year-old, let's say. Right there before your eyes, you have the very presentation of why domestic violence continues to grow in exponential ways. When children are not properly and timely intervened, they become the next generation of victims and abusers. So this mother that comes to the shelter is met by the staff. She is carrying, if anything at all, a black garbage bag where all of her possessions are. Hopefully, she brings some ID papers, some identification documents, passports, birth certificates, social security cards, those kinds of important documents that she may have been able to grab last minute before she comes to the shelter. Sometimes she comes with absolutely nothing, not even the garbage bag. We offer legal services, a team of 4 attorneys, paralegal, legal advocate, present all of the legal options that are available to her, including recreating those identity documents that she may not have been able to grab last minute. She is offered counseling. She is offered case management and a myriad of other services in the first phase of her stay at the shelter. There is a school so that she may have the confidence that the children are just within a few steps from where the mother is. Again, we have been very, very targeted in the creation of children's services, therapeutic and otherwise. There are other services that are offered at the emergency phase of her stay at the shelter. But the second phase addresses the self-sufficiency that she needs to be confronted with as she moves towards independence and away from threats. So we offer housing. We have 3 different housing programs that she will be assigned to. And the other very important thing that I want to mention is that there is no limit to the amount of time that she can spend at the shelter. I will give you an example of a real case that we had. There was a mother who was released to the shelter from the hospital, having her hands severely butchered. That's what it was, by the perpetrator, in the presence of her 3 children. The children were ages 16, 12, 8, and she was expecting a 4th child. The man hurt her so badly. She was cutting hair in her garage for some of her friends, and the money that she received, she was collecting to put herself through beauty school. That mother stayed with us for 2 years, and we continued for a long time giving support and therapy to the children. Let me just say that the older one was found 3 days later, after the mom was taken to the hospital on that awful morning. He was hiding behind the bushes, holding the knife that the perpetrator had used to hurt the mother, because he wanted to do the same thing to the father. So right there is a very graphic depiction of what generational violence does, and how children are so severely impacted. Compare that mother that stayed with us for 2 years to a single woman that may come to the shelter, and she knows about domestic violence. She may know something about her legal rights, and she has a healthy support system, let's say in New York. So after that, a divorce decree is out and it's given, she will be provided with transportation. So she goes to New York, and she has stayed with us probably no more than 4 or 5 weeks. So people get to stay at the shelter for as long as they have to, until they have reached a certain level of self-sufficiency and independence. One thing that I want to do today is to clearly define for you all what domestic violence is, so we all understand it the same way. Domestic violence is a progressive pattern of behaviors in a relationship when one of the members in that relationship, one of the partners, the husband, the boyfriend, controls the victim in utilizing emotional, psychological, physical, sexual, financial means. Any of those elements do not have to be present in a domestic violence, in an abusive relationship, for it to constitute domestic violence. But 2 concepts are critically important: pattern and progressive. Domestic violence is not someone who puts a gun on the head of another person. Domestic violence, that may be the end of domestic violence, but it is never the beginning. It is important to know this, because many times law enforcement reports may state that it was not domestic violence, but that it was a dispute. A dispute is not domestic violence. A dispute can occur between 2 people who have never seen each other. It needs to fulfill the requirement that it be also a progressive phenomenon. Victims of domestic violence reinvent themselves many times. They are forced, or they think that they have to, in order to be accepted by the partner. Because he doesn't like women that look like this or that act like that. There will always be an excuse for the escalation. And many victims stay in these abusive relationships, reinventing themselves. They want to please, and ultimately what they fall prey to is to denial. I always say that denial is the best friend of the perpetrator. Denial reinforces in the perpetrator that he can go up a notch in his abuse. These days, during COVID, the very strategy that was created and implemented to keep us healthy and away from contagion and from infecting others has created a situation of entrapment and impossibility for the victims to reach out. We have seen a decrease in the number of hotline calls that have come to the shelter during the enactment of the stay-at-home orders. The same thing is happening to the children that live in the household. It's impossible to do anything if the perpetrator is moving alongside with you from room to room. And let me refocus on the children again. A child that is in the presence of domestic violence is not a spectator. Children are not spectators of domestic violence. They are victims of domestic violence. If you think about the 3 children who witnessed her mother's battering and knifing of her hands, those children had been, as I am sure the majority of children are, socialized to respect the father, to emulate the father, to be like the father. That's what children hear from everybody in the environment they are in. But in cases of domestic violence, they are watching this very person, the father or the father figure, inflict such pain and horrific batterings to the person that is most important in their life, their mothers. So that creates a unique and different psychological trauma from the trauma that the mother may suffer. That is the reason why, perhaps 10 years ago now, I changed the name of the Battered Women of Bexar County, Battered Women's Shelter of Bexar County, to Battered Women and Children's Shelter. If nothing else, to show that children are the majority of the victims of domestic violence. In fact, 2/3 of the people that we help at any one time with all of our residential and non-residential programs are children. They are always the majority. So that gave us the impetus and the path to create programs specifically addressing the psychological trauma of children. Let
Thank
me
you.
just, yes,
Oh, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just
yes.
wanted to make sure that we leave time at the end for questions.
Thank you.
Marta, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. No, 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 no. Thank you. I need to be reminded to be quiet.
Thank you so much for the information and I know we're going to have a lot of questions. I want to introduce next very briefly Maricarmen Garza. She is a group coordinator and a project director at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, and she is also a board member for Texas Council on Family Violence, as well as the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. And so without further ado, Maricarmen, the floor is yours. Thank you for sharing your expertise.
Thank you, Mary Lou, and thank you, Marta, for all that wonderful information. I was so excited to be invited to be a part of this Lunch and Learn, and part of it is because I see so many familiar faces, and I really miss everybody in San Antonio, so I'm glad to be here and see you all on my screen. And just a little bit about Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid. Many of you already know me and may know Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid. And I've been with them now for 20 years. And from the beginning of my work with TRALA, I have been representing victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking. And this has been the core of my work. I will tell you, this work, it is very difficult. It is hard. Doing the work is challenging. So I will try to talk a little bit and expand on what Marta has already mentioned, and also maybe give you some practical tools. Obviously, we have very little time, and many of y'all are experts already in family law and working with victims, but just some of the tools that I've learned over the years, and hopefully this might be helpful. Marta mentioned, and I know Mary Lou had brought it up to my attention in the past, that the level of fatalities in Bexar County has been increasing, and it's an alarming situation. So obviously, the sad thing is that domestic violence is preventable. So what can we do as lawyers? What can we do as judges? It's really educate ourselves on the dynamics and see what we can do and refer them to experts. A little bit more about TRALA. We provide civil legal services in over 45 different legal practice areas. I know many people just think of us in terms of a divorce or a protective order, but what I am doing and understanding with victims is that often they're going to need much more than just a divorce or custody lawyer. Sometimes they're going to be facing housing issues, economic issues, public benefits issues, and we try to do a holistic approach to cover all of those different areas of law. So if you are working with somebody who needs assistance in other areas, or you're working with a client and needs assistance in her house and she might be getting evicted, or just any other issue, feel free to refer them to TRALA. These are just some of the different practice areas that we have at TRLA. And one thing that's really important is that we really understand how COVID is going to impact the work that we do, especially when we're talking about domestic violence. I know Marta mentioned there's a decrease. People are isolated. They're sheltering at home with the abuser, with the person who will harm them. And it's coming at a really terrible time because it's similar to what happened during Hurricane Harvey, right? It's a disaster. Except with Hurricane Harvey, we knew what counties were going to be affected. Here with a pandemic, a health pandemic, it's affecting everybody equally. And research has shown that family violence always increases following a national disaster. And we are seeing the patterns also happen now that we have the pandemic. So I just wanted to share some of this information. All of this has been taken from the Texas Council on Family Violence, honoring Texas victims, and it's available. I just wanted to showcase a couple of things that I thought would be relevant for our discussion today. The other thing, and I know Marta has already mentioned, firearms. It is really, really important. One of the very first questions that we do ask survivors who are coming and asking for help when they've indicated domestic violence, we ask, is there a firearm in the house? That could be the number one key to finding out what to do and how lethal the situation can escalate to. Who has access to the firearm? Is it loaded? Is there safety planning to be done because they're still living together? Those are really important questions. And of course, if there's a danger, to ask for a protective order and ask for that gun to be retrieved. The law already states that if a protective order is issued, the other person cannot be in possession of a firearm or ammunition. So really important to ask those questions and then have a plan for the retrieval of those guns. The other, I know Marta mentioned a couple of other statistics, and one thing that we have also seen is a very high red flag. Until 1999, strangulation was not a felony offense. And many of our clients would report to us, as a matter of fact, if we go back and look at cases, many of them would say that they were choked, right? And the majority of them. And what we've discovered through statistics and analysis is that somebody who has been strangled, and the client might say choked, are 7 times more likely to be murdered by the same partner who hurt them. So as an attorney or as a judge, if somebody's speaking about being choked or strangled, they usually use the word choke. This is a case that already has some really high lethality factors, and it would be really important to talk about what safety things can be put in place to keep that family safe and that applicant or that victim safe in that situation. So these are key things to look at in identifying where you may have a case where it's a serious consequence may occur. The other thing is that many people think that leaving is what's going to make it safe, right? If you're in an abusive situation, leave. However, we do know that leaving is the absolute most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence. 1 in 3 of the women or the victims who were murdered had made attempts to end that relationship or separate. So even applying for a divorce or calling legal aid or calling a shelter could be deadly in some situations. So make sure that you have precautions, or if you're a lawyer, calling back, if they're not already separated, that there are some clear indications of how to leave messages, at what times to call, because having that information go to the wrong person could result in some really serious consequences. The other thing is the relationship status of the victims who perished. 41% of them were wives, 67 girlfriends, ex-girlfriends, ex-wife, and then 2 were solely identified as stalking victims. So ending the relationship, obviously, like the ex-girlfriend or ex-wife, did not end the violence for many people. And also age. In 2018, the youngest victim was 16 and the oldest one was 85. So it really, really impacts individuals of all different ages. One of the things that I have learned has been incredibly effective in working with somebody who tells me that they're afraid of their abuser, or that they believe their life is in danger or feels trapped. Of course, there might be some physical violence, but as Marta mentioned, family violence is defined in the statute, and it does include a finding that there was some intended or some actual physical impact or a threatened impact of bodily injury. But to really understand the dynamics and why a victim may stay or why she feels, and I usually refer to a victim as she, but please understand that this applies equally to men. For me to really highlight and be able to then showcase to a judge what happened, I use the power and control wheel. Usually it's like the homework that I give to clients when they come in and we have our first consultation, and I just ask them, you know, and I talk about the power and control wheel, and I ask them to highlight any of the different cogs on this wheel that they believe apply to them. And then from there, that's how I can sit down with them and ask questions about each one of these issues so that I can present a better case, so that I can seek more evidence to support the situation. Because as you know, many of these things happen behind closed doors with no witnesses. So to really build up a case that I could present to a judge and come out with a good outcome, I need to know all of the information. So this is something that not only allows me to better tell their story, it also allows me to connect them to other services, resources, counseling. You know, we are lucky that at Trala, we do work with social workers. And once we're working with a individual, we either partner up with our shelter partners or with our social worker to make sure that there's somebody looking towards the client in all the ways that we can assist them, because they're usually struggling with many, many things at the same time, and the lawsuit is just one of the things that they're having to work on. Again, statistics are really important, and the reason why I'm sharing them, I know Marta mentioned 1 in 3 women. It's important because as long as I have been doing this work, this is the one crime that happens, even though we know those are the statistics, where victims are routinely not believed that this happened. And so, again, it's important to know that it happens more often than we know, and that probably even in this call, there's probably victims and aggressors, right, in a situation. So I just want to make sure that you have this, that you understand it, and that it is that prevalent. It does happen. I mentioned early that I work a lot to bring experts into the mix, and sometimes our clients are not able to afford to hire an expert, right? Especially the victims that we work with. And I just wanted to share a super valuable resource that we at Trala and many other domestic violence programs have been using. UT has an Institute in Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, and they do an expert witness training. The other thing that they do is that they also do case consultations. So when I get a case that I'm just like, I don't know how to explain this, or can you help me understand why this might have happened in this situation? Because the way victims respond to a situation may be very different. They may be exposed to trauma or having a traumatic response to a situation. So it doesn't normally follow what, you know, our expectations may be of what a victim should look like, or how somebody would react to an assault, or how they would present themselves. So I do ask usually, as I'm building a case, for a consultation to explain some of the things that I'm not super familiar with and to get a better direction. And I also wanted to offer this to you. You can request a consultation, and Margaret, who is a dear friend and also who leads this project there, can either connect you with a local expert in your area, whether it's a forensic expert. I know we've looked at injuries, and there's a lot of forensic nurses that may be able to testify to explain certain injuries and so forth, or just somebody to talk about domestic violence and the dynamics. In San Antonio, obviously you have experts already, Marta being one of them, but there are many other individuals at her organization that could also serve as experts when you're trying to present a case that involves domestic violence, for sure. Quick tip for one of our projects. We, of course, if you're interested in doing domestic violence work or any kind of pro bono work with Trala, it's really simple. You can go up to our website and sign in. And one of the reasons why I'm bringing this up is because of the recent high lethality cases that have been happening in San Antonio. The city of San Antonio gave us a grant, and we are managing a new pro bono project to do protective orders, especially. We have Aaron Martinson leading this project. Aaron used to be the chief prosecuting attorney for protective orders in Travis County for many, many years. And she will be not only guiding this project, but working with the pro bono attorneys to give the expertise or any of the information that they need to work those cases through. So I wanted to put her information up there, and if you're interested, please give her a call. We would love to have more volunteers to make sure. I know our local DA's office do a good job with these, and so did Trala, but there's just so many cases coming in that are needing this representation that we really need to look out to the bar for some assistance as well. And lastly, I wanted to share just the many ways that individuals can call for legal assistance. We are still open. We never closed. Our offices may be closed, but everybody is working remotely, adjusting to this new reality, and we are serving more victims now than ever. As Marta mentioned, COVID has really impacted the way that we do work. In the month of April, I did a comparison of how many applicants came seeking services that had indicated that there was domestic violence in their life. And we had a 21% increase just in that 1 month. And I will tell you that the entire increase happened in our metropolitan areas, Bexar County, Travis County, El Paso. So the need to provide services in your community is really, really high. And so we're looking to hopefully get you to help us as well. I forgot how to stop. Okay, stop share. What else? Other ways that we have been impacted that I think might be interesting for you as a practitioner, as a judge, or just somebody that cares about this work is that social distancing impacts our shelters, right? Our shelter workers, they are essential workers, where most of us get to work from home. Our shelter staff, just like our medical staff, are staying in a shelter, working, risking themselves, their families' lives to make sure that a victim is safe from abuse and possible death. So it's really important. And Marta, please tell your staff how much we appreciate what they've done and what they're putting themselves through to make sure that victims have a safe place to go. The other thing is that I don't know what specific pressures might have been put because of the requirements to social distance and disinfecting. I know many shelters had to resort to have vouchers to place victims in hotel rooms. So also the financial impact of this for our programs that we work with could be substantial. And you know, Marta did mention that some of the hotline calls are down with children. One of the really things that we have seen and that many of the experts have talked about, most of the CPS reports would come from schools, right? Where the children are in touch with an adult who is mandated to report. But now that they are at home, possibly with their abuser, there are many, many less cases being reported to CPS. Interestingly so, the National Sexual Assault Hotline, and many of you might have listened to this on NPR, did report an increase in calls for sexual assault services by minors since the pandemic started. And in many situations, they had to send somebody to the home because there was a very dangerous situation happening. So I just want you to be aware that our children are going to be tremendously impacted. Everybody's impacted. In our rural communities, victims feel even more isolated. Whereas here in Bexar County, what we're thinking is happening in the more urban communities is that there's neighbors, you know, neighbors may hear noises. Somebody's going to call law enforcement if they hear that something bad is happening. But when you go to more rural communities, and there's some surrounding San Antonio, where you are, you know, an acre or two away from your next neighbor, and there is no vehicle, and everything else is controlled. I mean, just think that those situations, you may not see them now, but you'll start seeing them when the pandemic, you know, when things start opening up a little bit more and a victim is able to leave safely. So another thing to be aware of is that something that you can do is safety plan. Safety planning is so important. And it's not like the CPS safety plan, right? Every time I say that, as most lawyers will think, we're thinking of the CPS safety plan. But safety plan with your client, if they're a victim of domestic violence, they may not know technology is something that is really different, right? And we need to inform them how to safely communicate for help if that's an issue. The pizza, calling law enforcement to order pizza was a safety plan. We usually tell our clients, have a neighbor or somebody that you can call and give a clue that they need to come to help you that will not alert your abuser. You think these things are innate, but in the minute, that victim needs to know and have a plan of what to do. Another thing, if you're already in litigation, have a safety plan for arriving to court. How's she going to get there? Is she taking her own car? Is she going to get dropped off? Because usually the abuser knows she's going to be at that courtroom, right? And what car she's driving, so he can find her out in the parking lot. So I plan from the beginning how they're going to get there, where they're going to go, where I'm going to meet them, make sure they go straight into the courtroom and not in the hallway if necessary, because that could be where they may be intimidated. And if not by the abuser, by the family. So all those things need to be thought out and discussed. And if you need any help on any case where you're working with a victim of domestic violence, and you want to, of course, barring conflict of interest, have some conversations or some general information of what to do, I'd be happy. And I know everybody at our organization and our social workers and Marta, consider us resources for this kind of work.
Thank you, Maricarmen. I appreciate you, and of course, I appreciate Marta. Both of you have shared so much with us in such a short period of time. So I'm going to open it up to questions, and I'm sorry to be so intrusive with the interruptions in this virtual space. It's a little bit harder to do the kind interruption or the hand on the shoulder. But we do have a question. Our first question is from Judge Michael De Leon. He is one of the judges on our misdemeanor domestic violence criminal courts. And I'm sure both of you will appreciate the question and the nuances that I'm sure are shared by many. Here's the question verbatim. What is one of the best ways to prevent victims of domestic violence to returning to their abusers after an arrest or separation of some sort? And then the commentary from, and again, a lot of perspective from these criminal misdemeanor courts on the criminal side, the domestic violence courts. A lot of victims do not pursue prosecution and return to their abusers and to the same violent relationship. And I know it's been said by many, and I have personally heard it be said by many of the criminal court judges. They do feel powerless if there is a decision to not prosecute. And so I turn that with the caveat over to the both of you. I'm not sure who would like to take the answer first.
Okay, Judge Alvarez, I will go with Judge De Leon. We at the shelter are very, very conscientious that that is exactly what happens. The best solution for a victim is found in the law. So we prep them. We have those very important conversations with the victim to make sure that she understands that she needs to stay with the charges, etc. But 28% of women, this is a national statistic, 28% of women who go to shelters go back to shelters 7 times. That is the reflection of the trauma and the fear that they feel because only they know the capabilities of the abuser. If the abuser has told them that they will do this or that to herself or the children or family members, they believe that he will. So you're asking for what to do. Patiently comprehensive services, rebuilding the trust in the system will get her to stay with the charges and to collaborate with the judicial system. They also have heard other victims of domestic violence, friends of theirs, who have been wronged by the system. So they have all of that as part of their personal experience, and they're acting on it. But more than anything is the fear that they have for the abuser, having lived for time over time, hearing and listening to what he will do if she moves with charging him.
And I would add to that, you know, it is a very hard choice for a survivor to make, right? And I find that protective orders are a tool, but protective orders that not include for the support of the children financially and or custody, not custody orders, but possession orders, make it really, really difficult for a victim to stand on her own 2 feet after a separation, after they reported it. You know, so those things, a protective order is quite immediate. You know, if you're doing magistration, give them some time to get to a legal aid, get to a district attorney's office to seek a more permanent protective order, but then include those other things that are going to be there to support her until she can apply to get a divorce. I mean, we have over 21,000 eligible applicants for our services to every one attorney that we have. So it's not that easy. And you know how expensive it is to get divorces. And if you have no finances, that is going to be a really challenging situation for somebody. So I think protective orders that include provisions that will allow a victim to stay on their own 2 feet, that award property, which is all allowed under the code, will go a long way in actually allowing somebody to stay away from their abuser. And that's just one tool that may be available.
Okay, we've now got 2 more questions in the chat, but Amber Liddell always has her hand raised, so I'm going to do live question, chat question, but know that we've got 3 in the queue already. So Amber, do you want to ask your question, please?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Judge. And this is not a Bexar County case for those Bexar County judges who happen to be on this feed. My question to the experts is, I have a case where I believe that financial abuse is occurring. Do you find that judges take that allegation as seriously as physical abuse? And are there any suggestions that you can provide to me quickly on how to convince a judge it's abuse, just like any other form of abuse?
It is, and it happens more often than not. And I do have a story from a case I did many, many years ago in front of a local San Antonio judge, Judge Pelaez. And I remember presenting evidence like all the credit cards. Which one do you have access to? None. Bank account. Are you on, you know, do you have a debit card? No. Do you even know where he banks? I mean, and going one by one of these things and actually showing how this is not a relationship based in equality, and having that person later explain why not. It was their undoing at that point. So I definitely go through all of those issues. I ask about the finances, and you know, that is going to be really important information that you could probably get really quickly. And then again, to tie it together, you can always bring an expert to talk about how financial abuse is something that is terribly controlling, demoralizing. You know, it's just like when you have to ask for money to go to the grocery store to buy something for your child, or, you know, your own, you know, personal needs. It is not a relationship that's based in equality. So I definitely ask all of those questions. The Power and Control Wheel has a whole section on financial abuse. So when they highlight that, I start going and asking detailed questions so that the judge can get a really full picture of what that is.
Thank you.
Just remember, Amber, that the two requirements in the definition of domestic violence, progressive and pattern, and that all of those modes or ways of abusing someone, emotional, psychological, physical, sexual, financial, they do not all have to be present in an abusive situation. Any one of them that constitutes a pattern over time is domestic violence.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you both. And there's the question from Ms. Justine Daly. The question is, who's one of our experienced and well-regarded family law attorneys here in Bexar County. Any suggestions or tips if the abuser is a police officer?
Those are really hard. And it's really scary, and it's very intimidating for somebody to speak up against authorities, and it happens. I mean, all you need to do is look up, just Google it, and it is something that happens just like in any other profession. But when you have somebody that has the law on their side, who has weapons, who has friends in the system, it just makes it very, very difficult for that victim to speak up. So I think do it very carefully. Again, present it just like any other case. Again, I would probably also want to include an expert, because this is a really common thing that happens. I mean, with some law enforcement, and just that is a serious issue. Luckily, if you do need a protective order, and I know it's been argued at times that, well, they're going to lose their job because they can't carry a weapon. There is an exception for that. While they're doing their job, they may carry a weapon. That's not going to impact their ability to continue to be employed. They might get some other issues, you know, that will impact them. But, you know, we've gotten protective orders against law enforcement in the past, and they kept their jobs. I just don't know about the particular departments, but police reports may not be accurate. And another thing is what we find is that many law enforcement are not doing really accurate police reports, or they're not going to be police reports at all. So just knowing that absence of police reports does not mean that it did not occur, because this is one of the most underreported crimes anyways to start with. So those are challenging, and just see if there's, I know I had a couple of cases several years back where that was an issue. If you know, there are more particulars that you want, please reach out to me, and I can help you strategize.
Martha, anything to add to that particular question?
I would say that the person is not any safer by not reporting it. We have a very collaborative relationship with the San Antonio Police Department. If the person asking the question happens to be in San Antonio and Bexar County, please reach out, and we will make sure that, number one, your confidentiality is of course protected, but we will find ways to get some justice to the victim. I know that the chief of police, the local chief of police, Chief McManus, who happens to be a member of my board of directors, understands the issue very well, is very much dedicated to speaking on behalf of victims, and there are things that can be done. I don't think that he would like to know that there is someone in his force who is a perpetrator of abuse. I believe that he would want to deal with that officer who is an abuser as well. But just like Maricarmen said, I know it's a very intimidating thing to bring forth, because he may have threatened, I'm sure he has threatened endlessly over time, and fear is preventing that person from coming forth. But please reach out.
And we are right at the 1 o'clock hour. I'm sorry, Maricarmen, did you want to add something really quickly? Because we have one more.
I just wanted to add something. I mean, domestic violence, emotional abuse, financial abuse, whichever abuse they're experiencing, is one of the most disempowering things that can happen to a person. And in terms of what they want to do, it's really important. What are the results they want to seek? Sometimes it's not putting the father of their children in jail. That may not be it. Maybe it's not having this person lose their job, but really giving them those tools and those options so they can make the best decision should be important. This might be the very first time that somebody's telling them, what do you want to do, right? And I think as professionals or individuals who work with victims, really listening to that and then be creative into how to accomplish those goals, right? So that they can stay engaged and they feel like they have some kind of say. So of course, guide them in the law, let them know what's doable and not doable, but within those parameters, like give that power back.
All right, and our final question, and I thank all of you who have given us a few more moments of your time, and of course, I thank our presenters for being here. Here's the question from Jennifer Richardson. I believe she is also an attorney here in Bexar County, or excuse me, in out of county. But the question is, what guidance would you offer other social service agencies as they prepare to work with families post this phase of COVID, i.e. to prepare the trauma clients to prepare for the trauma clients may have experienced while the stay-at-home order was in place? And Marta, we'll start with you, and then Maricarmen, if there's anything to add.
I would say that anyone that is getting ready to provide services to victims of domestic violence must remember that services need to be comprehensive. They cannot be band-aid approaches, because if that victim does not see results, she will go back to the abuser. And if services are disconnected, if they are not offered in an easy way to approach them, they will go back to an abuser, because this is creating attending services that are all over the city, let's say, brings more problems for her to be able to leave the house, to explain where she's living, and all of the logistics that she's going through. So comprehensive services. If counseling is going to be provided for her, there needs to be some type of daycare or babysitting service offered, so that she can come at any time that she can with the children for those counseling sessions.
Maricarmen, anything to add? And just for clarification, Ms. Jennifer Richardson is of the United Way of San Antonio and Bexar County. So my internet search was not very fruitful, so I apologize, Ms. Richardson, but that's why she's asking any tips to share with other social service agencies.
I mean, I don't have anything in addition to add. I know that we provide legal services. We do work with many local providers, but one thing that I just wanted to also include out there, since this is a topic, domestic violence, is that if the victim applies for crime victims compensation, they would be eligible to get counseling through many different providers throughout town. So that is another thing that many individuals do not know. That is an avenue of getting that help if they're not able to get the help or can go to Family Violence Prevention Services or a different organization. This will allow for counseling for her, for the children, for anybody involved. And, I think that may be an important resource to know, and for attorneys who work with victims to know that may be available as an option. It also includes like relocation money if they need to leave, if they have loss of income. Of course, there are some requirements, but I wanted to just put that out there because that kind of all ties together of what makes a victim be able to be independent and stand on her own 2 feet. It includes all of these different resources. So
thank you. And again, one more time, it's in the chat several times, but I wanted to make sure everyone knew that the name of this course is Advocating Nonprofit Partnerships to Serve Our Families, or advocating or activating, I'm not sure, but the course number, which you will definitely find for our attorneys and our judges, the course number is 174085339. And thank you so much. And for those who are not used to my familiarity with our presenters, I have known both Maricarmen and Marta since 2001. Since I started doing this work, Maricarmen was my first boss in the domestic violence arena. And I continue to learn so much from both of you. And I can't thank y'all enough for sharing your expertise and your advice with all of us. And I can't thank all of our participants and the folks that have come, community members, attorneys, judges alike. It really, truly just warms my heart that we are all so committed to trying to make sure that our communities are served to the best of our ability. So with that, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your engagement. And the PowerPoint presentation that Maricarmen presented is in the chat feed, so I'll give you a few minutes to download it. There's also some resources. Honoring Texas Victims Report can be found at tcvf.org. There was also a website that was posted up on the feed. So please take a look at that website. And again, I believe myself and Judge Diaz will have this presentation on our YouTube channels. So thank you all for your engagement. Thank you for being here, and reach out if there's any questions or anything that we can help. And Maricarmen, Marta, thank you so very, very, very much. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for, I apologize for the technical difficulties.
I know we all have them. Don't worry. Thank you. I think the recording captured everyone though, so we'll see what happens.
Thank you, and bye everyone. It's so nice to see I practiced law and learned from many of you when I was in San Antonio. So thank you. Thank you for joining.